Hello and welcome to Blender Bite Size. In this tutorial I'll show you a very basic simple draped fabric setup. Feeling lazy? You can support this channel and skip the hard work by grabbing the blend file for this material from Gumroad for just £1. Feeling flush? Feel free to throw some of that coin my way using the coffee link in the description below the video. For upcoming tutorials, I'm going to be focusing on fabric materials. So what I thought it would be a good idea to do is show you how I set up some draped fabric. That way you'll have an idea of how that part was done, so I don't have to repeat it in all of the future tutorials. There are many different ways of setting this up. This is again just my way of doing things. So you know what? Watch, see if it works for you. If it does, great. If it doesn't, there are plenty of other tutorials on YouTube. So let's make a start. Now normally I start out in the shading tab. However, for this one we're going over into the layout tab. And I'm just going to rotate the view so I've got a better angle. Now the first thing that I need to do is make this object, or whatever objects I've got in my scene that I want to drape the fabric over, into a collision object. So that's easy to do. We go over to the physics properties and just click on collision. I'm not going to do it for the background because hopefully the fabric won't actually touch the background. I'm not going to change any of these settings either because they're all pretty much fine as they are. Okay, so next up we need to add something that will be the fabric. So Shift A, mesh and plane, and I'm going to set that to be around 5 meters. That's because of the size of my object that I'm draping over. Obviously you can set it to whatever size you need it to be. The next thing that I'm going to do is go into the front view, so that's number pad 1, and I'm just going to hide the cylinder that's there. Then press G to move something, to move the object, and Z to constrain it to the Z axis, that's up and down. Click to set it in place, then G and X to move it left, right, and click to set that in place. And basically we want it just above the object that we're going to drape it over, and that way it will sort of sink over the thing. Okay, next up, this is basically just one massive square, and if we try and distort that over a sphere, it's not going to work. We need to basically create lots of faces. So we're going to go into edit mode by hitting tab. I'm going to right click and hit subdivide. Now my general rule of thumb is 10 divisions or 10 number of cuts per meter. So for this object, which is 5 meters, it would be 50 cuts, and you can see how many squares we've got there. Now we do want better subdivision than this, but we don't want to rely just on this subdivision. We're actually going to use a modifier as well. So this is basically a base to work from. Press tab to come back into object mode, and then before we leave the physics tab we're just going to hit the cloth icon, and that will set this to be cloth. On this little icon here I'm going to click and then just select cotton, and that will basically set everything up within all of these parameters to be roughly cotton, and if I chose one of these others that would be the same. We're now going to go into the modifier properties, and we've already got our cloth applied there, but I would also like to add a solidify modifier, and I'm going to set this to be complex, the thickness mode to fixed, the boundary to round, the thickness to 0.15 millimeters, which is my rough guess at what cotton thickness is based on card. It's probably actually thinner than that. And everything else we're going to leave as it is for the solidify modifier. We are then going to add a subdivision surface below that. Leave it set as Catmull Clark. leave the levels for the viewport at 1 and the render for 2. This basically means it's going to look a bit janky in the viewport, this here, but when we come to render it, it will be much better. Finally, we're going to right click on the object and hit Shade Smooth. Now we need to head back and make some more changes or update the cloth. So hit this little icon here to get catapulted straight over to the Physics tab and into the cloth properties. We are going to increase the quality steps to 6. Go down to where it says collisions and increase the quality to 4. I'm going to leave the distance set as it is, but I do need to enable self collisions. This basically means that when the fabric folds and comes back on itself, it won't then try and intersect. It will actually see itself as an object to collide with. And that's about it for changes on the cloth at this time. Now if we open up this, where it says cache, basically rather than pressing the space bar every time to animate this, we can bake all of the physics into every single keyframe or every single frame. Actually, what I might do before I do that is just press R to rotate, Z to constrain it to the Z axis, and just rotate it a bit. That way the little pointy bit here will hopefully come down in front. Anyway, that's by the by, that's just not a necessary step. What I was talking about was this. So yes, basically rather than pressing spacebar and having to wait for our GPU to render every single frame each time, we can bake it ahead of time so that the animation is smoother while we are previewing it. Now it does take a couple of minutes depending on your GPU, so I'm going to shut up for a second and speed this bit up. Okay, that's now finished baking, so I can press the space bar, and although it's running at 14 frames a second, which is about half speed, that's much better than 1 frame a second. So I get a better idea if it's good or not. Now, just to get to the point where I've got the draped fabric complete, just going to skip to the end. So just type 250 in here. That's the number of frames I've got set up in my animation. Now, in the future, like I said, we're going to be talking about shading that object or that fabric. So we're coming into the shading tab, and you can apply materials to this in exactly the same way you do to any other object. So let's just take that off there. So we need viewport shading enabled. I've got a principled shader set up. And for this one, I'm just going to apply some color just so we can see the fabric. But for future ones, like I say, I'm going to give you normal node setups for all sorts of different materials. So let's very quickly run that through to render. I'm using the Cycles render engine and my GPU to do the thinking with 512 samples. Okay, and that took around 40 seconds to render that simple piece of fabric, so that's good. Now then, you can see it's actually just chopped through the floor because I didn't set that to collision, but for future demos I'm going to actually have this higher anyway, so blah blah blah. Anyway, if you've enjoyed that video, please give it a thumbs up, and of course subscribe for future content. In the meantime, thanks for watching.